when time is not on your side, when you're tired of hating me, you no longer want to hide. You're stuck to the failures of your life, or with the sorrows of your stride. When time waits for no one, it heals when you die. When soon you are forgotten, whisper within the sight. When there's trouble admitting that you have been wrong all along, when the words you have written down reads everything is gone. It's stuck to the failures of your life, or the sorrows of your stride. When time it waits for no one, reveals when you die. When soon you are forgotten, whisper within the sight. When time it waits for no one, reveals when you die. When soon you are forgotten, whisper within the sight. When you smother your friendships and take much more than you need, when you can't keep a secret to yourself and points to the source of the deed, you're stuck to the failures of your life, or the sorrows of your stride. And you can never find a satisfaction when you can't outgrow your false your soul is weight on the silver scale of the seas
All right. I'm gonna play some of this Zelda roguelike game. Played a little bit earlier. It's actually quite fun. Let's see here. All right. time is it? 2 nearly? Interesting. Let's pull up some YouTube stuff for reactions to.
But you told me to stay, and you told me goodbye. When our bodies float on the river,
maybe I've just missed it. I haven't seen it yet. Spoken about it.
oceans are
Okay.
in my
How's it going? Is anyone here? I streamed at like 6 this morning or something. I went to bed really fucking early last night. I just got up from a nap. Cool. Let's see. I wanted to watch this one. I have been for a few days, not very long, it's like 17 minutes. The horrifying death of James Prout. Never heard of him. We'll see.
Hello,
We're
everybody.
gonna play
Shrouded
Dungeons of
in-
Infinity.
I want to talk about a murder that happened in 2016, quite close to where I live in the northeast of England. Maybe I've just missed it, but I haven't
Okay.
seen it getting spoken about much, and as you'll see, it's got some extremely disturbing details. So, this is the murder of James Prout. To understand this murder, we have to look at the circumstances surrounding it and the close-knit lives of a small group of people.
Sure.
James Prout, known as Jimmy to his friends, was a vulnerable adult with learning difficulties.
Oh.
At one point, his life had been fairly normal. He was in a committed relationship and he'd fathered 2 children. Early photographs show him looking healthy and happy. However, in 2006, his relationship ended and Jimmy Prout's life descended into one of homelessness and petty crime.
Ooh, I know about that. Not petty
It was
crime,
most likely
but...
around this time that he met Zahid Zaman at the People's Kitchen. This is the soup kitchen in Newcastle city centre. Zahid Zaman modelled himself as a pillar of the community, an animal lover and a friend of the downtrodden.
Sure.
In actual fact, he was a manipulative, sadistic egotist with a penchant for bestiality porn.
Oh, good.
He volunteered at the People's Kitchen, and it was here that he trawled for vulnerable people to take advantage of. He was in a wheelchair from a car accident years before, but apparently this was mostly for appearances. He was often witnessed jumping up out of his chair to run for a bus or to carry furniture.
Do y'all remember that that guy that was like in a wheelchair and he got all this sympathy and he fucked up while he was streaming and got up? Like, that was a huge thing back in the day.
He lived at 35 St. Stephen's Way in Percy, Maine, North Shields. His
That was
neighbours knew him as a
crazy
bit of a
shit. I forgot all
troublemaker.
about that. To,
After
like,
moving
right
into
now.
the property, he'd fitted multiple CCTV cameras to the house, and he used this to spy on people coming and going up and down the street. He had a habit of calling the police on his neighbours for extremely petty reasons, often making
hate
up
people
stuff
like
just to
that.
get them into trouble.
Some
He was
bullshit.
also known for going around in his wheelchair with a body-mounted camera, trying to goad people into getting into an argument with him. He would then use this footage to report them for harassment.
Yeah.
Essentially, he was a crybully. He lived with a woman called Kay Rayworth. Rayworth owned
That's a
property
woman?
at number
Holy
35
shit.
and she had been quite involved
Sorry.
with the local community,
Hmm.
volunteering
Alright.
and taking part in the church choir. However, after her husband left in 2004, the now isolated Rayworth turned to drink and began using internet dating
Yeah.
sites to meet men for casual sex. It was through one of these dating sites that she met Zahid Zaman, and he moved into her home in 2007. After moving in, Kay Rayworth's friends noticed a change in her. She became isolated and withdrawn. She stopped taking part in community activities and seemed to lose her outgoing personality.
Sure.
Behind the scenes, Zaman was slowly taking control of her life. He would fly into fits of rage, threatening to beat her with a hammer. He stopped her
Jesus.
children from visiting the house, and he put cardboard over the windows to stop people seeing inside.
Oh.
Kay Rayworth also owned a property around the corner, number 75 St. Stephen's Way, and she rented it out. At some point, although the timeline is a bit unclear here, Jimmy Prout met a woman named Anne Corbett at the soup kitchen. The two of them started a relationship and moved in together at number 75.
Okay.
In 2009,
So they were
Zahid
tenants of
Zaman met a woman
this
called
lady's-
Myra Wood on Facebook. They developed a relationship, and in 2013 she also moved into number 75.
Jeez. That's a lot of
Similar to Kay
relationships going
Rayworth,
on.
Myra Wood's family noticed a change in her after she got involved with Zahid Zaman. He had set about systematically isolating and controlling her just like he did with Rayworth. So, to recap, because this is a bit of a convoluted situation,
Yeah, a little bit.
we have Zahid Zaman, who is no longer in a relationship with Kay Rayworth, but still living with her at number 35. He's now going out with Myra Wood, who's living at number 75 with Anne
Okay.
Corbett and Jimmy Prout. The five of them formed this weird, almost cult-like gang with Zaman as the leader. Some headlines have called them the North Shields Death Cult, but I don't know if the word cult is completely accurate. As far as I can tell, they didn't follow any
Gang or something? I
particular
don't know.
belief or ideology,
Yeah.
but they do have some of the characteristics present in this "Are you in a cult?" checklist. Like, the group is focused on a living leader to whom the members seem to display excessively zealous, unquestioning commitment. And members' subservience to the
what?
group causes them to cut ties with family and friends and to give up
That's
personal
like
goals and
Scientology.
activities that were of interest before joining the group. Also, members are encouraged or required to live and or socialize only with other group members.
It's like
And most
Scientology.
importantly, the group teaches or implies that its supposedly exalted ends justify means that members would have considered unethical before joining the group. Jimmy Prout's role in this gang was basically the dog's body. He was constantly made to run errands and do odd jobs for the rest of the group. It seems that in the hierarchy of the gang, he was at the very bottom. It also looks like he became the group's scapegoats. The women of the group, fearful of violent repercussions from Zaman, would pass the blame for their own transgressions down to the lowest member of the gang. As
Sure.
violence and abuse became normalised within the group, they would have taken their own frustrations and fears out on Jimmy. Jimmy Prout lost a huge amount of weight during his time at St. Stephen's Way. I don't know whether he was deliberately starved. Food restriction is another method of control within cults. It could have just been caused by the poverty and the stress of the situation, but photographs of him in 2015 show a shocking change from his earlier life.
Yeah.
2015 would see a serious escalation in the violence. Zahid Zaman had developed a burning hatred for Anne Corbett's brother, Ivan. Possibly this
Dude,
was
I need,
because
like, a
Ivan was seen
cork
as an
board with
outsider to their gang.
Yarn and
He would
shit.
occasionally
to
stay at
connect
number
all this
75 with his sister, but he wasn't part of the core group. Zaman accused Ivan Corbett of stealing tools from him. Ivan had moved out of number 75, so none of the gang could actually get hold of him. Instead, they directed their anger at Jimmy Prout, accusing him of not doing enough to help them recover the stolen items. He became the target of an escalating series of attacks. It's not known who exactly administered these beatings. Later, when questioned, the gang members would all blame one another in an attempt to absolve
Yeah,
themselves
it's
of
never anyone's
responsibility.
fault, right?
Sometime in mid-November 2015, Jimmy was severely beaten and stabbed. He didn't seek medical help until the 27th of November when he attended the North Tyneside General Hospital. The doctor who treated him said he had bruises to his arms, head, face, legs and back, and he had stab wounds to his left shoulder, left upper arm and scrotum. His left shoulder was
Ooh,
also
a bruised
fractured.
scrotum?
The stab wounds to his scrotum seemed to be a prelude to a much more gruesome attack that would come later,
Stab
and a
wounds
sign
to a
perhaps
scrotum.
that the
That
violence
doesn't
was
sound
becoming
fun.
sexual in nature. On the 30th of November, Jimmy posted a number of photographs of his battered face and body to Facebook,
Yeah,
a
that
desperate
guy.
cry for help that seems to have been ignored.
Jesus.
My mouth hurt, my body hurt, my shoulder hurts. Over the following few
Goddamn.
months, Jimmy Prout was subjected to increasingly depraved punishments and degradations at the hands of his so-called friends. He was strangled and had a glass bottle smashed over his head. His teeth were smashed from his jaw using a hammer and chisel. On one sickening occasion, he was made to lie on the floor whilst Zaman's dogs raped him. And this
The
probably
dog
wasn't even
raped
the
him?
worst thing they did to him. One day, they held Jimmy down while somebody sliced open his scrotum with a Stanley knife and
Oh my
removed
God.
one of his testicles. They then cooked his testicle by boiling it in water and forced him to eat it.
Jesus Christ.
A number of
No.
CCTV clips taken from number 35 show Jimmy Prout's deteriorating condition as the torture escalated. This one was filmed in October of 2015, so it must have been before the worst of the abuse started. Jimmy seems to be walking around looking relatively healthy here.
Sure.
Now look at this footage from just 4 months later. This was filmed on the 5th of February 2016. It shows Anne Corbett pushing a distressed and dishevelled Jimmy Prout towards number 35 St. Stephen's Way. I'm not sure which of the abuses had been done to him at this point, but he appears to be in tremendous pain and having trouble walking. They were filmed again a few hours later. Again, Anne Corbett is escorting him towards number 35. This time Jimmy Prout looks to be having difficulty staying upright, and he stumbles against the fence for support.
Jeez. Maybe he's drunk, I don't know. God damn.
The following day, they're seen again. This
Can
time,
only hope
Kay
he was
Rayworth
drunk.
and Anne Corbett are escorting Jimmy Prout to number 35, holding on to him like a prisoner.
Took the man's testicle and made him eat it. It's awful.
Notice the expression on his face. The face of a man being taken to the torture chamber.
Why?
At around 10:15 that night, the gang are seen leaving the property. Kay Rayworth aggressively grabs Prout in the process. And here comes their God Emperor. I mean, you know you fucked up in life when this guy's your leader.
Yeah,
They're
I
seen
mean,
walking up the streets, and here Jimmy Prout appears to
Yep.
collapse, and the gang seems to lift him
What-
to his
what
feet
can you
and drag
say?
him onwards.
Jesus.
3 days after this footage was filmed, James Jimmy Prout was dead. The exact details of his final moments are unclear. Again, nobody wanted to admit what happened and all seemed to blame each other.
Hold on. Sorry, this is awful, but this is funny. Hi, I'm Justin, the games creator. Nintendo put me in jail because they don't like people making games using their assets. That is so fucking funny. Holy shit. I had many secrets in the rebel village. I hope you find them all. It's dangerous to go on. Take this. Oh, nice. Oh, that is fucking hilarious. That is great.
At 5:02 a.m. on February the 9th, Myra Wood texts Zahid Zaman saying, "That bastard had me awake all fucking night," referring to Jimmy Prout. It seems that at some point in the early hours of that morning, in order to muffle Jimmy Prout's cries of agony, somebody tied a pair of trousers around his face like a gag. When the gag was removed, he was dead.
Jeez.
Half an hour after the text message was sent, Kay Rayworth and Zahid Zaman were seen taking an empty wheelchair from the garage and wheeling it in the direction of number 75. 35 minutes later, they returned without the wheelchair. At number 75, the group had dressed Jimmy's corpse and wrapped it in 2 sleeping bags. Then, using the wheelchair, they wheeled his body to some nearby waste ground and dumped it there. I'm not sure of the precise location, but the newspapers describe it as a waste ground barely 100 metres from number 75 and next to the A187. I believe that puts it somewhere in this area.
Shit.
From number 75, there's a wheelchair accessible route that goes under the 187 and emerges in this area, so I imagine that this is the route that they took his body. Later that night, they had a bonfire in the garden of number 75. Most likely they were burning evidence that linked them to the murder. In the days following the killing of Jimmy Prout, the 4 remaining members of the group made a real show of asking around the neighbourhood to see if anyone had seen Jimmy, feigning concern at his sudden absence. At some point they even returned to Jimmy's body to steal his bank card, which they used to withdraw money from his bank account on a number of separate occasions. The body remained undetected for over a month, but something changed in the group dynamic around the end of March. It's been speculated that Ann Corbett was threatening to go to the police, or at least they suspected that she would, and so they hatched a plan to frame her as being solely responsible for the murder.
God.
On the 25th of March, Zaman called the police sounding like he was in a state of shock. He said that Ann Corbett had attacked him. He then handed the phone to Kay Rayworth, who confirmed what Zaman was saying. The police came to number 35 to speak with Zahid Zaman, and he handed them 3 sheets of paper. He said that Ann Corbett had attacked him with a hammer, and in the ensuing struggle she had dropped these papers. When Zaman read them later, he realised that it was a handwritten letter in which Corbett confessed to killing Jimmy Prout. The police weren't fooled by Zaman's story. The next day, Zaman, Wood and Rayworth were all arrested. On the 27th, Corbett was also brought in for questioning. That same day, police found Jimmy's body on the wasteland. During interrogations, all 4 members of the group attempted to throw one another under
Yeah,
the
it was
bus
nobody's
whilst
fault. I was
minimising
about
their
to
own
say
involvement in the
Oh
murder.
yeah, I didn't do it. It was
As further evidence was
did it.
presented, their stories and excuses changed as they attempted to wheedle their way out of the blame. It made it impossible for police to deduce exactly who inflicted which injuries and who dealt the killing blow. It was decided that Ann Corbett and Zahid Zaman were definitely present when Prout was killed, and so they were both found guilty of his murder. Zaman, as the ringleader of the group, was given life with a minimum of 33 years. Corbett was given life with a minimum of 27 years. For some reason, it wasn't as easy to
But,
prove
like,
that Myra
why?
Wood and Kay Rayworth were present at his death. They were found guilty of causing or allowing the death of a vulnerable adult, but cleared of murder
I
or
mean, why did they
manslaughter.
kill him? Not why did they
Now,
get
I don't
that
really understand how you
sentence?
can be guilty of causing someone's death, but not guilty of manslaughter or murder. I guess that's why I'm not a lawyer. Rayworth was given 12 years imprisonment. Wood got 9 years, although those numbers don't really mean anything, as 5 years later, Wood and Rayworth were both released.
Wow.
You torture a disabled man to death and basically get a slap on the wrist.
Pretty much. That's fucked up. Yep. Welcome to America.
And so, there you go. A depressing story with a depressing ending, and I hope I thoroughly spoilt your day. Now, actually, I hope you found the video interesting. I'm glad to be able to cover this case because, as I say, it's a local tragedy, and I find these cases interesting just because I kind of know the area, so I can picture it a little bit more. And as far as I can tell, this story didn't get the coverage it deserves. Perhaps I've just missed it, but I haven't seen many people talking about this case. So a big thanks to everyone for watching and to everyone who is helping keep the channel going. As always, it's much appreciated. Oh, and I should add, because a lot of people have been asking me this, if someone in the comments claims to be me and asks you to join some Telegram group so they can send you a PS5 or a MacBook or something, it's definitely a scam. Please don't fall for it. Anyway, thank you for watching. Until next time, goodbye.
We'll watch the 162 most controversial levels in gaming history later. I forgot I even put that one on here.
Urban legends, a type of folklore that...
Hello everyone, and welcome back to Scary Interesting. In this video, we're going over 3 terrifying cave diving stories. And the final story features a gruesome condition unlike any other that's been covered on the channel so far. And it is horrifying.
I don't know that I have.
Viewer discretion is advised. Located in the small town of southeast New York sits the old Tilly Foster iron mine. The ore there was first discovered in 1810, and by the 1850s, hundreds of Italian, Irish, and Austrian immigrants found work there. The mine was later excavated with multiple horizontal tunnels beginning around 300 feet or 91 meters below the surface, and at its deepest it reached 600 feet or 183 meters. Between 1887 and 1889, the mine underwent a transformation, becoming what's known as an open pit mine. This is exactly what it sounds like. The material is mined from the surface on down, creating a large open pit in the process. This brought notoriety as the Tilly Foster iron mine became the largest open pit mine in the world, but little did anyone know at the time that this decision would have serious consequences. On November 29, 1895, about 35 men, separated into 2 crews, were working at the very bottom when they heard a distinct and loud noise above them. Looking up, the miners were horrified by what they saw before all light from the surface was cut off. Speeding toward them was an avalanche of rock, dirt, and debris. Heavy rains in the area in the preceding days weakened the rim of the pit, and all at once it collapsed. The rockfall then slammed into the men, many of whom were frozen in fear by what they saw before they were.
It's not like an avalanche. Avalanches are like snow specific, right?
As rock and dirt were rained on them with force, men were completely buried. Many of them were then badly injured, while others died instantly or couldn't breathe beneath the weight of the fall. When the dust finally settled, there were 12 bodies that need to be recovered and a handful of other men who were injured and in need of medical attention. Those who could immediately started digging the fallen men out from under tons of rock and dirt, and as the rescue effort got underway, men from the surface started to hurry down to the panic scene, and this caused a second rockfall that claimed yet another life, bringing the death toll to 13. When it finally seemed safe to do so, the rescue effort continued, and in the aftermath, some of the bodies that were uncovered were so badly mangled that it made identification extremely difficult. The mine would remain in operation for 2 more years until it was clear that the company that owned it couldn't financially recover from the disaster. Shortly after, the Tilly Foster iron mine was flooded by a nearby reservoir, submerging most of the pit and its tunnels well below the surface forever. This,
and
however,
now people
wouldn't be the last the
go
mine was heard
diving
from.
in there a bit.
Between its closure in 1897 and the start of World War II in 1941, it served a dark purpose. It became a dumping ground for old cars, trucks, and other various items, but also bodies. Less than 70 miles north of New York City, the town of Southeast and the abandoned mine were the perfect place for the mob when they wanted to make people and evidence disappear. And this would continue for about 50 years until dumping anything in the pit was prohibited and heavily policed. As World War II got underway, the purpose of the mine started to shift when the US Navy began using it to test out diving equipment, and from then on it became one of the diving community's best kept secrets. Few people were ever allowed to dive it because the mine was located on private property, and the owners were unwilling to accept liability if anything ever happened to a diver at the site. As time went on, however, a team of 3 divers managed to convince the owners to let them undertake a series of dives that would allow them to explore and map it out. In
I'll
fact,
look
to
that.
even get permission from the owners, the divers signed legal waivers that absolved them from any responsibility should an accident occur at the site. After 4 years of exploration and mapping, divers Bob and David arrived at the Tilly Foster Iron Mine on November 19, 2017, with a much different mission than any of their previous dives. This time, they were in search of the body of a woman named Robin, who was murdered in 1995. Much like the mob before him, the killer used the mine to dispose of the 17-year-old, and her body had yet to be recovered. So just before noon that day, Bob suited up in a heated wetsuit and entered the water. At the surface, the water in the pit was around 70 degrees Fahrenheit or 21 degrees Celsius, but just 10 feet or 3 meters down, it dropped drastically to 42 degrees Fahrenheit or 5
Shit.
Celsius.
10 meters?
This is
It's
because
not
right
even
off the
that
dock, the
much.
pit dropped to about 175 feet or 53 meters deep. Now, rather than dive together, Bob and Dan were going to
That's
go
a
into the mine
huge
separately.
gradient.
Bob was scheduled to go in at noon and
Well,
spend 90 minutes searching
no.
for Robin at a depth of around 300
Never
feet.
mind, 10 meters.
Dan
it's
would then
actually
enter the
quite a
water at
bit.
1 o'clock
It's
with
like
the two
30
passing
feet.
each other in the large pit somewhere along the way.
Ish.
At the surface was also a support diver who would be called into service if necessary. This was a bit of a curious decision as the mine presented a number of dangers. As you might imagine, decades of dumping junk cars and whatever else into the pit made for cloudy water, so visibility was an issue.
Yeah.
All that dumping also added a lot of hazards in the water that divers would have to negotiate. But either way, according to the plan, Bob disappeared into the
Negotiate,
water
navigate,
and began
does he
his
mean?
descent. Then, an hour later, Dan went in to perform his own 90-minute dive, but he never encountered Bob on his way down. Around 3:50 that afternoon, Bob's girlfriend grew concerned. She knew he was diving that day, but he was supposed to be back at her place in Queens for a party, yet as it got underway, he still hadn't shown or called. So shortly afterward, a deputy was dispatched to the mine, and when he arrived, he saw two people milling around the pit banks. As he walked toward them, they started to explain that Bob had entered the water around noon and that he was expected to surface around 1:30, but that never happened. By then, it was after 4 p.m., and the deputy asked why they hadn't called 911. Dan then responded they were just going to come back the next day with some extra equipment to look for the missing diver. And weirdly, for unknown reasons, neither Dan nor the support diver called emergency services when Bob had failed to return from his dive. Shortly after the deputy arrived at the scene and was
Weird.
briefed on the situation,
Sus.
state police divers and local fire departments arrived to begin a search for Bob. Because of how much danger the mine presented, however, they were going to lean on technology. Using advanced sonar equipment and a deep water camera, the state police searched for Bob and finally got eyes on his lifeless body about 25 hours after he had gone to the
Jesus.
surface. Then, with a cable, they were
happened?
able to attach to his diving equipment, and about
Yeah.
20 first responders pulled his body up and out of the pit. When the camera had finally found him, it was
Goddamn.
initially clear what happened to Bob. At the very bottom, he became completely tangled in wires and cables. Curiously, however,
That'll do
when the
it.
dive computer on his wrist was checked, Bob had run out of air around 12:34 that afternoon. Considering he was in the middle of a 90-minute dive, this was strange. When Bob entered the water that day, either by an oversight or miscalculation of how much air he'd need, he did so with tanks that were only about halfway filled. So after an investigation, the incident was ruled
Why?
a tragic accident, and police theorized that Bob became disoriented in the pitch blackness of the bottom and somehow ended up among the tangle
Oh.
of cables. When this occurred, he likely panicked, which only served to tie him up even more and increase his breathing rate. This then caused him to run
I
out of
would
air
like to
more
go
quickly
scuba
than
diving,
expected.
but
So
not
it's
like
unclear
that.
if the amount of
Fuck
gas
cave
he entered the
diving.
water with was
Nah,
ever
man.
going to be enough for him that day,
Not gonna
even
happen.
if things had gone according to plan.
Not gonna happen.
Along the picturesque coastline of Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula sits one of the world's longest, most extensive, and most complex cave systems. This system is called Sistema Sac-Actin, and it has about 228 total miles, or 368 kilometers of passages and chambers that have been mapped so far. This makes it the longest underwater system and the second longest cave system in the entire world behind Kentucky's Mammoth Cave.
Like,
Because of this
Why don't you
expansiveness,
send,
some of
like,
Earth's greatest mysteries and
drones
oldest
down
connections to human
there?
history reside here. Like, for
You don't
example,
have to go
rocks inside
down
the
there
system are known to be
yourself,
more than
I
250 million years old. There are also mastodon fossils that have been found here, and so have the remains of a human woman thought to be the oldest ever discovered in the Americas. The system itself was formed by the constant changes in sea level over millions of years, and while the entire peninsula has more than 7,000 sinkholes, also known as cenotes, a fair number of them are actually located in and around the Sac-Actin system. Many of these cenotes are quite deep, but the system itself averages only around 70 feet or 21 meters in depth. Incredibly as well,
That's not that
despite its
bad.
age, exploration of the Sac-Actin system didn't really get started until the late 1980s, and its status as the longest underwater system in the world didn't come
It
until
does
a
look
connection to
cool,
another
though.
system was discovered in 2018.
It is beautiful.
So, since most of its known history has been uncovered more recently, it's been a favorite system for cave divers looking for variety. And with more than 220 cenotes as part of this system, which were created by roof collapses inside the cave system, there are plenty of known entrances to its many sections. In December of 2004, a group of 9 certified divers arrived in 2 vehicles just outside Cenote Kalimba along the Koba Road. In terms of difficulty, this section has an average depth of around 33 feet or 10 meters, with a moderate current that isn't much of a challenge to seasoned divers. This area, as you might imagine though, is not without danger. It's a relatively small cave with jutting rock formations creating some tight squeezes, and those formations can be fragile. One wrong move can cause rock to break free from the walls, and depending on how severe, this can pin a diver in place or create what's known as a silto, which is when sediment becomes suspended in the water, greatly affecting overall visibility. More than anything though, divers have to be careful of the various intersecting tunnels in the area. One corridor can look almost identical to another, so getting turned around and lost can happen easily if divers don't remain aware of where they are in relation to the exit. But in any case, the 9 divers that arrived on December 9th had been on several dives together in the preceding days, and they had developed communication and chemistry that had served them well to that point. For their dive in Cenote Kalimba, they'd be split into 2 groups. Team A would be made up of 4 divers plus 1 guide, and the remaining 4 divers would form Team B. Their dive plan was to have Team A go in the water first. They would cross several intersections before reaching another cenote, at which point they would turn around and return to where they started. Team B was supposed to follow almost exactly the same dive plan, but they would enter just after Team A, and they would turn around just before reaching the second cenote. So at around 9 o'clock that morning, all 9 divers were suited up and in the water of Cenote Kalimba when Team A began their dive. Following the permanent line, Team A dove to the very end where they encountered the first intersection. Before advancing any further, one of the divers pulled out a yellow plastic cookie marked number 1 and fixed it to the jump line across the intersection. This was to both let other divers know that the line was in use and to let Team B know this was the correct line to use. After crossing the intersection, they were on a new permanent line which we'll call line number 2. Further down line number 2, Team A reached another jump at another intersection. One side of this intersection led downstream to their goal, which was a cenote known as Cenote Box Chen. So, using a spool of rope, one of the divers fixed it to the end of line 2 and connected it with the next permanent line, which we'll call line number 3. As the diver was doing this, they also left cookie number 2 on it to indicate to other divers and to Team B.
Cookie?
A little while earlier, and shortly after Team A descended into Cenote Kalimba, Team B began its dive. After about 32 minutes of traveling through these small cave passages, they came across the first gap that connected line 1 and line 2. Once at this intersection, the team followed line 2 for about 65 feet before reaching the jump to line 3. The team then continued down line 3 until they reached the end of their dive as was planned before they entered the water, so they turned around and began making their way back to where they started. When they reached cookie number 2 again, however, they made a huge mistake. They should have turned right, but instead they turned left and followed line 2 for 25 minutes, covering about 1,400 feet or 427 meters. And further compounding this, after making this wrong turn, there were directional markers pointing the way they were traveling, so they mistakenly believed they were heading toward their exit.
Sure.
In reality, they were heading toward a completely different exit, which is what the markers were actually pointing to. Around this time, the team came upon a massive jump and came to the realization they had made some sort of mistake. At this other end of line 2 was a jump of about 70 feet to the permanent guideline leading to 2 other cenotes. And still not quite realizing where they were, one of the divers pulled out a spool of rope and began to search for the next permanent line while the others remained at the end of line 2. Moments later, the diver returned to the group after being unsuccessful in finding the permanent lines, so they finally decided to turn back around the way they came. They were now in the midst of one of cave diving's greatest dangers, and it was clear to them as well that they were lost. Even worse, they had inadvertently added tons of time to their dive.
Yeah.
Team B then continued back the way they came on line 2, and as they did, they split into
That would be
pairs separated by a
fucking
short
terrifying.
distance. A few minutes later, at the intersection where they took a wrong turn, the lead pair discovered that the jump line marked with cookie number 2 was gone. This was because in their original plan, Team B was supposed to exit before Team A because they turned back before them. Thinking that was still the case, on their way out, Team A had removed the line they had placed, thinking they were the last ones in the cave. As all of these separate, confusing incidents began to pile up, so did the panic that Team B felt. The lead pair from Team B were also running dangerously low on gas by then, as the dive was taking much longer than anticipated. Not only that, but the fear from getting lost had increased their individual respiration rates, which burned through the reserve gas they had. This ended up becoming so critical that the two then started budding breathing because one diver got so low in air they were close to running out. Around this time, Team A surfaced at Cenote Kalimba, and the guide was immediately concerned when they couldn't find members of Team B anywhere. Team A's dive had also taken 99 minutes to complete, and if Team B wasn't back soon, they knew they'd be in serious danger of running out of air.
Jeez.
Then, moments later, the lead pair from Team B surfaced at Cenote Kalimba with just a small amount of gas remaining between them. When they were asked about where the other two were, the lead pair said they couldn't have been too far behind them since they could see their lights during the dive when they looked back. But after waiting another little while, the second pair still hadn't reached Cenote Kalimba. So, grabbing some extra tanks, the guide and several divers from Team A re-entered the water to search for the last two divers, but they wouldn't have to go too far to find them. Just 250 feet from the safety of Cenote Kalimba, the two divers were discovered against the ceiling of the cave. Both were completely lifeless with their regulators floating alongside them. It was clear that both had drowned when their air pressure was checked and found to be zero.
Jesus.
One of the Team A divers then grabbed hold of the first deceased diver from Team B and returned to the surface. The second diver's body was a bit more challenging to free due to a restriction in the area, but the guide and another diver from Team A were eventually able to recover the body. Police were then called and the bodies, along with their dive equipment, were turned over as an investigation got underway. In interviewing each of the divers, particularly the survivors from Team B, police uncovered the simple navigational error that led to the deaths of the rear pair.
God, that sucks.
As the 12th largest European country by area, Romania has an incredibly diverse landscape within its borders. There's a beautiful mix of valleys, mountains, hills, and plains, in addition
I would like
to
to visit
lush green
Romania.
forests. In fact, Romania is one of the most heavily forested countries on the continent, with about 27%
Maybe
of
one
the country
day
covered
I'll
in dense
visit
greenery.
my homeland.
And while not particularly known for them, Romania
check
also
and-
has other
and
natural
check
wonders,
descend-
like caves, both dry and
descendant.
underwater. Like, for example, in one of them, which has a name that translates to the Cave with Bones, the oldest known human remains in Europe were located and dated to be around 40,000 years old. Another cave system named Uzbukal Towers may lack that kind of history, but it's one that's still drawn speleologists from all over Europe for its crystal clear waters and decorative rock formations. It's located west of Transylvania in the Apuseni Mountains, and the entrance at the surface is little more than a green dot of water surrounded by high moss-covered cliff faces. The entire area around the small body of water is about as beautiful as you can imagine, especially when the forest leaves change color and fall. Beneath the surface, though, is just as, if not more, gorgeous. The waters of the cave are a pristine bright blue, similar to what you'd find in the ocean, but much, much colder. Water temperatures in the cave tend to hover around 39 to 43 degrees Fahrenheit, or 4 to 6 Celsius, no matter what time of year cave divers visit. Exploration of the cave system didn't get underway until 1982, when a Hungarian diver dove into the cave and made it through the first length of underwater passage and came upon a large dry air pocket. He then discovered a second submerged passage, which he entered and made it up to 154 feet or 47 meters. Today, the cave has been mapped to a known depth of about 344 feet or 105 meters, but at the start of the new millennium, the race was on among cave divers to be the first to go the deepest. By 2001, a group of divers from Poland set the depth record at 260 feet or 79 meters, but in 2002, another Polish diver was determined to
I'll
best
play a
that mark.
video game about cave diving.
On October 4th, 2002, experienced and certified cave diver
That may be
30-year-old
fun.
Rafael Garski entered Izbukal Towers at around 2:45 in the afternoon. For days leading up to this dive, the caving club he was a part of enjoyed multiple dives in the system, and Rafael was already intimately familiar with it. His record dive that day would be a 2-hour expedition that he'd perform solo, although he'd have a support team on the surface should anything go wrong. And because his planned depth was in excess of 260 feet, Rafael had to carry several tanks with several different gas mixtures.
Damn.
In fact, Rafael was carrying 5 different tanks. 2 of them were filled with surface air, 2 were
Holy
filled
shit.
with trimix, and 1 was filled with argon. This last one filled with argon was crucial for something incredibly important, which we'll go over in just a second.
Argon?
In any case,
Why?
after
Can you
entering the
breathe
surface
argon?
and
I
signaling
guess you
to the
can.
support team
It's
at
like
the
a
surface
dart,
that
right?
he was going to get his dive underway, he slipped
Instead
into
of
the water
noble
to his
gas?
buccal towers. 2 hours later, at 4:45 p.m., Rafael was expected to be back at the surface, but when the time came, he still hadn't shown up. This wasn't all that out of the ordinary, as dives can sometimes take longer than anticipated, but when he wasn't back by 5:45, the support team knew things had gone bad. The Polish Alpine Association was the first organization the dive club members reached out to, but it would take another 2 days before they could even arrive in Romania. This meant that if Rafael had any chance of surviving, the dive club would have to attempt the rescue themselves. Since there are air pockets inside the system, the hope was that Rafael might have had some sort of equipment malfunction and sought refuge in one. The first attempt to reach him, however, didn't occur until the next day when another diver entered the cave system and descended to about 150 feet or 45 meters. Around this depth, Rafael was expected to stash his 2 tanks full of surface air, but the diver couldn't find them anywhere. It seemed impossible that Raphael would take them to his intended depth, but where he put them was anyone's guess. The next day, a second diver went into the cave in search of Raphael and made it to 256 feet or 78 meters. There, lying on the floor of sedimentary rock, was the lifeless body of Raphael.
Damn.
He hadn't made it into an air pocket after all. So, full of sorrow, the diver approached his body to gauge how difficult it might be to bring him back to the surface. In a quick examination of the equipment, the diver tried to inflate the buoyancy device Raphael was wearing, but he had no luck. Then, sensing it was time for him to begin his journey back topside, he left Raphael where he was and returned with the tragic news of his passing.
Yeah.
3 days after the initial dive on October 7th, the Polish Alpine Association arrived on the scene, but it would be yet another day before another attempt to retrieve Raphael's body was made. Unfortunately, this first one failed too. It wasn't until finally on October 9th, 2 divers made their way down to the body with a tank of compressed air to inflate Raphael's suit, which did the trick. Several hours later, Raphael's body surfaced for the first time in 3 days. In a subsequent investigation, Raphael's equipment was meticulously examined to determine what could have gone wrong, and what they determined painted a picture of a horrifying end. Strangely, there were no signs at all where Raphael was found that would indicate that he panicked or even tried to hurry his way to safety.
Sure.
Had he gotten frantic at all, the surest
Did he
sign
have a
would have been
leak,
still
maybe?
floating in the water in the vicinity of his body, but when the first diver came across him, he reported everything being still and undisturbed. Whatever happened to Raphael, he must have been incapacitated to the point of not being able to help himself. When the investigation was complete, it was determined that a variety of factors came together to cause Raphael's death, and it was like a perfect storm of disaster. Here is what was found.
Okay.
On his descent into the cave system, Raphael was wearing all 5 of the tanks he'd need for the dive.
5?
This
That's
extra
so
weight helped
many.
him
I
to
mean,
the
I know
descent
you're in
stage, but
water,
when he
so you have
switched to the
buoyancy,
trimix
but
at an
still.
appropriate depth, he was supposed to ditch
A
the 2
lot.
surface air tanks and retrieve them on the way back up during his decompression stops.
Sure.
It's not entirely clear why, but it's thought that Raphael decided not to remove the air tanks after all, to aid his descent to the full depth to save energy. Under normal circumstances, this likely wouldn't have been a problem if not for the next issue he encountered. By that point, he was on his trimix because he was in a deeper section of the cave. These tanks were also connected to a buoyancy vest he was wearing that could be inflated to assist with surfacing. This apparatus, though, was found to have a leak. Again, we can't say for
There it
certain that he
is.
noticed this because he can't give a first-hand account, but he likely did when he found it difficult to ascend. His respiration rate upon noticing this likely increased, and this, combined with the leak, caused his trimix supply to dwindle. This also means that he couldn't inflate the vest properly, all of which was further compounded by the extra
That
tanks he
makes
had with him.
sense.
Now, this alone might seem like enough to cause Raphael's death, but there was one final thing that contributed, and the most likely scenario is terrifying. As alluded to earlier, the argon tank Raphael had was crucial. This is because he was wearing what's known as a dry suit. Unlike a wetsuit, a dry suit creates a physical barrier between the diver's body and the water. This suit also has a small amount of gas in it, which helps to keep the diver warm, and argon is sometimes used because it has better thermal insulating properties than regular air.
I didn't know that.
When the
I
argon
thought that's
tank
what
was examined after his
wetsuits did.
death, however, it was completely empty and a leak was discovered. Once this gas ran out, Raphael's window to save himself started to rapidly close because
Oh.
that's not the only point of the gas in the dry suit. When the argon gas tank was tapped out, it did 2 things. First, hypothermia likely began to set in, which would have caused Raphael uncontrollable shivering, confusion, drowsiness, and a loss of motor skills. But second, and more importantly, as a diver descends in a dry suit, they have to add more gas to their suit because of the pressure at depth. This is because the volume of gas in and at the surface gets compressed immensely as depth increases. This initial volume, if no more gas is added, eventually compresses to the point that it's like a vacuum seal, like you might see with vacuum sealed clothing. When this occurred, it would have rendered Raphael's limbs almost completely immobile. And not only that, the suit would have tightened around him so much that he would have experienced intense pain from the squeeze. So, unable to inflate his buoyancy device, carrying excess weight, and completely helpless to do
Jesus.
anything about it, Raphael sank like a stone and could do nothing but watch and wait. At some point during this process, he did manage to switch from his trimix tanks to his surface air tanks, but at that kind of depth, severe narcosis was a certainty. Raphael likely spent his final moment in agony and fear before drifting into unconsciousness. His death was ultimately ruled an accident caused by hydrocution, otherwise known as cold water shock.
Hydrocution. I've never heard that word.
If you
That's a
made it this far,
badass word.
thanks so much for watching. I've mentioned this before, but it's getting harder and harder to come by caving
Hydrocution.
stories.
Like
So if you know of
electrocution,
any
but
that
with
you haven't seen on
water.
the channel, I'd love to hear them, and you can submit them to the form in the description. Also, thanks so much to all the divers who reached out about the third story. Your expertise
Damn. That shit is fascinating to me. It's terrifying too. Let's see. One scientist error, the deadly outcome at Galeras volcano.
Volcanologists are irresistibly drawn to the primal power of volcanoes. Their passion borders on obsession, driving them to explore these fiery giants up close. In 1993, this obsession led 6 scientists to their final moments as they descended into the heart of an active Colombian volcano. As they navigated the rugged terrain, the earth suddenly roared, engulfing them in chaos.
Jesus.
Why were they so deep within the volcano at the moment of eruption? What went wrong in those final moments, and could it have been avoided?
Yeah,
Chilling
don't go near the
truth will
volcano.
reveal a story of passion, peril, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge that led to unimaginable tragedy. Volcanologists are by definition super adventurous people. The career is a blend of relentless travel
I
and outdoor
suppose.
expeditions, infused with a constant sense of excitement. One volcanologist said, "Once you get started in volcanoes, you become a junkie. The earth is changing and you try to outfox it, understand its past activity, and predict what it's likely to do in the future." Volcanologists frequently venture into active volcanoes. Their primary aim is to predict eruptions and mitigate the impacts on nearby populations. But
Okay.
predicting eruptions is incredibly difficult and complex. Stanley Williams, a volcanologist from the US, said that most people run away from volcanoes. We
Yeah,
head
no
straight
shit.
for them. Volcanoes come in various shapes and sizes, each with unique characteristics. The most well-known types of volcanoes are cinder cones, shield volcanoes, and stratovolcanoes. Cinder cones, the most common type, are steep, conical hills that usually have this prominent crater at the top. Shield volcanoes are the largest on Earth, and they lack the dramatic peaks of the stratovolcanoes.
Yeah, they're like very
Instead,
wide.
they're broad with gentle slopes formed by repeated eruptions over
It's
millions
like
of years.
calderas too, I think.
Their thin, runny lava flows to create a wide, gently sloping structure. Stratovolcanoes, with their conical shapes and steep, snow-covered peaks, stand high above the surrounding mountains. Comprised of lava flows, pyroclastic deposits, mudflow deposits, and lava domes, they're active over tens to hundreds of thousands of years. Mount Rainier in the Pacific Northwest is a stratovolcano, and it's an active volcano. It's actually considered the most dangerous volcano in the lower 48. And Mount St. Helens is another famous stratovolcano that had a massive eruption in 1980. And we're going to be focusing on stratovolcanoes. For volcanologists, the allure of these natural giants is irresistible. The complexity and unpredictability of these volcanoes draw them closer, driving their desire to understand these powerful forces. As they collect samples, there's an unspoken understanding that lingers in the air. The very mountains they
dude.
seek to understand
Nah.
could, at any moment, turn on them in an instant. There's over 1,500 active volcanoes in the world, each one a potential source of devastation. Since 1500, volcanic activity has claimed the lives of around 278,000 people. Historical records reveal the grim aftermath of volcanic eruptions.
God damn it.
In past eruptions, 30% of the fatalities were caused by famines and epidemics that followed the blasts. Another 27% died in pyroclastic flows, and those are dense, fast-moving flows of solidified lava, volcanic ash,
She
and
says
hot
lava weird.
gases.
Maybe I say lava weird.
And they
I don't know.
incinerate everything in their path. They can travel as fast as 300 miles an hour. Mud flows accounted for 17% of the fatalities, while another 17% perished in volcanic tsunamis. Galeras is a formidable stratovolcano located in southwest Colombia. It's 8 kilometers or 5 kilometers in a straight line from the small historic city of Pasto, which is one of Colombia's oldest cities. By road, the journey takes about an hour and a half to traverse the winding, rocky roads through the Andes. The city and surrounding area are home to over 500,000 people living under the shadow of this once volatile giant. To local indigenous people, Galeras is known as Fire Mountain. It stands at over 4,000 meters, or about 14,000 feet high, and it's been designated as part of the Decade Volcano Program by the UN. And that's because of its violent eruptive history and proximity to large populations. Galeras is one of the oldest active volcanoes on the planet. It's erupted more than 30 times since the 1500s, making it one of Colombia's most active volcanoes.
Shit.
After years of
let's
dormancy,
build a
Galeras
town
awoke
around
in
it.
1988
Sounds like
and
a
its
good idea.
activity sharply increased until August of 1991. Scientists observed a rising number of tornillos on seismographs. A tornillo event is a low-frequency seismic event associated with volcanoes. And about 1,000 tons of sulfur dioxide began streaming out of the volcano daily, indicating that magma was rising from deep within the earth. The volcano's rumblings quieted down for a few months until July 16, 1992, when the pressure just became too great. The dome blew off, catapulting 12-foot boulders and columns of gas way up into the sky. If another partial summit collapse were to occur, the consequences could be catastrophic, potentially killing 500,000 people in the region. Galeras and the Andes are part of the Ring of Fire, a string of 1,200 active volcanoes that arc through South America, Central America, North America, Russia, Japan, and the Philippines. The Andes alone contains 176 active volcanoes. Galeras is comprised of this huge amphitheater that is about 2 kilometers or 1.5 miles wide. To descend in it, you have to climb down, gripping this 100-foot rope due to the steepness of the walls. Within this amphitheater rises a cone that towers about 137 meters or 450 feet above the surrounding area. And inside that cone lies the steaming crater. The volcano is dotted with fumaroles, or gas vents, where high-pressure gases escape
I don't
from
know
the magma
anything about
body
volcanoes,
beneath.
really. So
The
it's actually
Volcanic and
pretty
Seismic
interesting to me.
Observatory
God
in
damn it.
Pasto was established to monitor Galeras following its reactivation in 1989. In 1993, Stanley Williams organized an international workshop focused on Galeras, making it the largest international scientific gathering in Colombia's history. Over 100 participants attended, drawn by the allure of studying one of the world's most dangerous volcanoes. Stanley was known for being a little bit difficult to work with, but had earned the respect of Colombian scientists for his dedication to preventing another volcanic tragedy in the country. Nevado del Ruiz is another active volcano in Colombia, and in 1985 it erupted. The eruption produced pyroclastic flows that melted summit glaciers and snow, generating massive mudslides that raced down river valleys. It killed over 23,000 people and was Colombia's worst natural disaster. Scientists feared that the same may happen to Galeras and the people nearby, and this conference was kind of a way to collect critical data on Galeras' activity. Past research had already determined that Galeras would probably erupt again. City of Pasto lies at an elevation of around 9,000 feet. Historical records showed that hot rocks and gases had repeatedly bombarded the outskirts of Pasto over thousands of years.
Stop
although not during the
building
1900s.
villages around volcanoes.
The
Did you
plan
not
for the
learn from
conference was
Pompeii?
to hold 3 days of meetings from Monday to
Goddamn.
Wednesday, followed by a field trip on Thursday, and then one day a discussion would follow. By the time the conference began, seismic activity at Galeras dropped to an extremely low level, and the volcano was releasing only about 100 tons of sulfur dioxide per
Only?
day.
That's a
Occasionally, the
lot.
scientists observed those
100
tornillo
tons.
events, but they didn't really fully grasp their significance. Galeras fooled us, Stanley later admitted, reflecting on the events that would soon unfold.
We were volcanologists with a lot of experience. We had been working for 5 years by that time on this volcano. We thought we understood Galeras. In fact, we thought Galeras was in a relatively calm time for an active volcano.
Stanley Williams stepped into his first volcano in 1978 in Guatemala, and he found it absolutely exhilarating. The acrid smell of sulfur, the intense heat radiating from the
Smells
earth,
like
and the
rotten
sight of
eggs
molten
and
lava
shit.
swirling below created an experience like no
thanks.
other.
I'll stay in my
And one thing he loved
space-based
about being a volcanologist
scientific
is
area.
setting foot where few people have ever been. His view is that the best way to study and understand a volcano is to climb right into it.
I mean, he's
Danger
right
adds
about
to
that.
the allure,
right.
of course, but by 1993 he had lost over a dozen friends and colleagues to volcanoes.
God
He
damn.
says volcanologists are hooked on the thrill of climbing into a crater. No other place on Earth
Yeah.
leaves me feeling as alive as a volcano does, he said.
True.
At 40
I mean,
years old in
I understand
1993,
it. I
Stanley
think
was a
it's
seasoned
stupid,
expert
but-
with a bit of a rebellious streak. He was balancing his professional, daring career with the responsibility of raising a family. He came to Colombia after the catastrophic 1985 eruption. And the experience left him acutely aware of the need to improve eruption forecasts and educate officials. He knew without better preparedness, future eruptions could kill tens or even hundreds of thousands of people. Over
Yeah.
the years, he built a reputation as a bit of a
Because they're
maverick in the
making
scientific community,
villages
often
at
clashing
the
with his
base of
peers.
the volcano.
But he was excited
Stop.
to get to Galeras and study it alongside
Jeez.
other scientists. Little did he know his intuition and daring spirit were about to be tested like never before. Marta Calvacci was born in Pasto and dedicated her professional life to studying Galeras. The sight of the steam rising from the crater and the scent of the sulfur were familiar to her from a young age. She worked in the crater numerous times and knew every inch of its rugged terrain. Marta could sense when it was safe to enter the crater and when it wasn't, her instincts honed by years of experience and study.
Sure.
A prize graduate student of Stanley Williams, Marta was renowned for her unparalleled ability to hike and navigate volcanoes. No one could keep up with her. Marta and Nestor Garcia, another Colombian volcanologist, had been studying the Nevado del Ruiz crater a year before it erupted. The day before the eruption, they were actually inside the crater meticulously gathering data and samples. When the eruption occurred, sending pyroclastic flows and mudslides down the mountainside, Marta's life changed forever. She resolved to devote her career to volcanology. In 1988, she first set foot on Galeras. The same year, it rumbled back to life. Galeras' long sleep was over. Nestor Garcia was born in
Damn.
Colombia and had a background in chemical engineering. His life took a pivotal turn when he joined forces with Marta to study volcanoes. The fumes and ever-present tremors beneath his feet left an indelible mark on his soul. Nestor was driven by a profound sense of duty. He risked his life repeatedly because he believed that understanding the volcano's behavior could prevent future disasters. His commitment to this cause was unwavering, even as it took him to the edge of danger over and over again.
Sure. No, there'd be
The
no
attendees
fucking
sat
way,
through
dude.
2 days of talks at the conference in Pasto.
I can barely
One talk that
stand
stuck
up,
with everyone
much
was a
less
presentation by
walk
Dr.
around a
Peter
fucking
Baxter, a
volcano.
medical
I'd fall in
doctor.
immediately.
He showed a gruesome slideshow that discussed the medical aspect of volcanic eruptions on the human body. He said there are a lot of ways to die from a volcano. There were mud flows, gases that could burn your eyes and rot your insides, small explosions of ash, steam, and volcanic blocks that could kill you instantly. But the most grisly way to go is death by pyroclastic flow, which would cook a body until it looked like charcoal. He showed photos of corpses that looked like they'd been barbecued and photos of people in rigid
If you think
solid
nobody cares you're
freezers.
alive, try
These
missing a couple of
images
car
represented
payments.
the pugilistic effects which occur at extremely high temperatures,
Nice.
causing powerful muscle spasms and contractions, locking the deceased in fighter stances. Then there's heat
Yeah,
rigor
that's
mortis.
crazy.
Some victims are left in sitting or walking positions. One victim in an eruption in the Philippines was caught in a pyroclastic flow and died immediately, and she was left standing frozen in place holding an umbrella over her head.
That is fucking wild.
These tragedies
Holy
served as a
shit.
somber reminder that the risks the scientists were facing as they headed into Galeras the next day.
I've been trying to reach you about your
After 2
car's
days of
extended
talks,
warranty.
scientist Andy Adams sat in this presentation uncomfortably. He wondered when the organizers would start talking about safety concerns and the risks of working on Galeras. Andy was a big, good-natured geologist from New Mexico, and he would be leading a team of 3 into the volcano looking at magmatic fluids. Andy was used to working with people who took safety in an active volcano really seriously, so he was surprised safety wasn't even mentioned before the field trip. And there was nothing in the briefings beforehand to suggest even a minor eruption was imminent. At the time of the conference, little was known about Galeras. The looming threat wasn't mud flows, but pyroclastic flows for Galeras. And scientists believe such an eruption was unlikely to occur for another 1,000 years, and even if it did, they expected the flow to go away from the town.
Yeah.
Despite this, a small state-of-the-art observatory was established in
It
Pasto,
never happens
and Galeras
until
was
it
constantly
does.
monitored. There were a few reasons to monitor the volcano. There was a police station that was located at the summit, and it guarded vital communication towers on the summit. And also tourists frequently went to the volcano, and there was a persistent fear that hikers could be killed if there was a small blast. The original date of the field trip to Galeras was set for Thursday, but a scheduled brownout meant power would only run at 50% on that day to conserve energy in the city. And since presentations required full power, the decision was made to move the field trip to Wednesday. Marta had to rearrange things and thought, well, what could one day matter? Missing from the workshop were
bet a
some of the
lot.
most esteemed volcanologists from the United States Geographical Survey. Known for their dominant presence in volcanic incidents worldwide, they were banned from attending due to the danger posed by Colombian drug cartels. Among them was Bruno Schwey, who had accurately predicted the eruption that damaged the communication towers in 1992. Andy recalled later that these talks preceding the field trip had an undercurrent of unease. There was a palpable sense that Galeras was once again acting suspiciously, similar to its behavior before the previous eruption. The tornillos once again had started appearing on the seismographs. Bernard had predicted the 1992 eruption based on these lines, and now they were back. In the dimly lit conference room, the atmosphere was tense. Concerned scientists met with Stanley and voiced their concerns. They pointed out that 15 tornillos had shown up by January 13th, the day before the conference started. The meeting was tense, and Stanley stressed that the low sulfur dioxide output indicated the volcano wasn't dangerous. Finally, a decision was made. Only those with a specific reason to enter the volcano would go, and the trip would be as quick as possible. The shift from Thursday to Wednesday seemed
about to
minor,
fuck
a
up real
simple
bad.
adjustment in their schedule. But in reality, it was a decision that would change everything. Igor Menyalov was one of the last to arrive at the conference and was a close friend of Stanley's. Stanley recalls Igor showing up with a beat-up suitcase and a cigarette dangling out of his mouth, his trademark look. Igor Menyalov was a highly regarded Russian volcanologist from Russia's Kamchatka Volcanic Institute, and he was 56. Described by some as a short, handsome man who learned English by listening to black market recordings of Elvis Presley, Igor exuded this rugged charm. His skin was weathered from years of exposure to volcanic fumes
I
and being
guess.
outdoors constantly. Colleagues affectionately referred to him as a crusty old fart, but they also acknowledged his incredible toughness and expertise. Igor's parents were both renowned Soviet volcanologists, and his mother famously climbed into an active volcano while pregnant with him. Volcanologists are all
Wow.
pretty crazy.
Yeah.
But this legacy gave Igor almost a mystical connection to volcanoes. He loved being in a crater, and in the past he'd spent so much time measuring gases that he became violently ill from the toxic fumes. Gas masks? What are those? For this mission, he would be working with Nestor Garcia and Jose Zapata. Jose was born in Colombia and enrolled in geology courses when he was young. One fateful field trip to Nevado del Ruiz changed his life forever. That day, he was upset when his sister forgot to wake him, causing him to miss the bus to the volcano. Later, the volcano erupted.
You gotta get
dozens
up,
of
you're
his
gonna miss
classmates
the
in
bus to the
devastating mud
volcano.
flow. The tragedy fueled Jose's determination to study volcanology. He visited the crater numerous times after that and secured a position at the observatory in Pasto. His wife constantly worried about his safety, begging him to stop risking his life, but nothing could keep him away
Sure.
from Galeras. He told her, "Volcanoes are my life." The night before the field trip, he called his wife, his voice tinged with excitement, and he told her about the upcoming expedition
It's like a
and
little
shared his
kid
enthusiasm because he'd be
going
working
on a
with
field
Igor
trip the
on
next day.
Galeras, his hero. The morning was cool and overcast, a light drizzle making the air damp and chilly. They bundled up in layers, their breath visible in the
good.
crisp air. There were 4 field trip options, one of which was led by Marta around the outside of the volcano.
Technically,
and the other was
yes,
Stanley's
a
group
field
of
trip.
13 going into the volcano. Dense white clouds enveloped the volcano, limiting visibility and adding an eerie stillness to the scene. A local television station was also at the summit, filming and interviewing people. The reporter repeatedly asked when the volcano might erupt. He wanted a juicy story about this volcano, but he was told by everyone that Galeras was tranquil and not likely to blow anytime soon. Meanwhile, one scientist wanted to go down into the volcano until he peered into it and looked at it and saw how dangerous it looked.
It's like, nah,
he decided
dude.
he did not want to go anywhere near it.
I'm good.
Andy Adams and another scientist stood
I'm
out
good,
in their
bro.
hard hats, steel-toed boots, and fire-resistant coveralls. Andy recalled Stan looking at them and laughing, his voice echoing slightly in the volcanic amphitheater. Few others had safety gear, and some didn't even carry masks. The lack of preparation for safety shocked Andy, and he was annoyed that no one else had any safety gear. They didn't have any first aid gear either. Some of these people had never been in an active volcano. And he thought, some expert Stan is acting like this is some kind of a picnic. And Andy had never been mocked for taking safety seriously before. He glanced around and wondered what the heck did he get himself into. As they continued their descent, the ominous quiet of the volcano seemed to echo Andy's unease. The ground beneath was unstable and there was a sense of impending danger. But they kept going. And in the meantime, a local teacher, his son, and his son's friend showed up at the volcano to hike down into it. Stanley noticed that they were wearing sneakers and jeans, which kind of made him feel uneasy, but he couldn't turn them away. They began the descent into the volcano around 9:30 a.m. Patty Mothis was there and waved goodbye to everyone and told them to be careful. She was a good friend of Stanley's, and her and her husband were well-known volcanologists. She'd worked on much larger volcanoes, and to her, Galeras looked benign. She was concerned, though, that some people weren't wearing hard hats because just climbing down released rocks on people below, so it was a bit of a danger. The reporters followed into the volcano, hoping to get some great action shots. Freezing wind whipped over the ridge, chilling them to the bone as they descended, gripping a yellow nylon rope for support. The slope was about 50 degrees here, but near vertical in other areas, so this was the best way to enter it. Jose and Marta knew the volcano better than anyone, and Jose had been there nearly every week for the past 2 years collecting samples from the fumaroles. These vents emitted volcanic gases and vapors. The smell was a constant reminder of the danger that lurked below. As they descended, Jose radioed the observatory to ask about the seismic reports, which was standard procedure. The response was reassuring. Everything was quiet. So he made the sign of the cross, whispering, "God will help us," before continuing down.
No, he will not.
Stanley told Eager that the gas coming out of the crater was hotter than 300 degrees Celsius, and Eager was super excited about that, and he couldn't wait to reach the crater to take some samples. At 9:45 a.m., the observatory noticed a tornillo appear on the seismogram. The squiggles didn't look too threatening, but protocol demanded that they inform those on the volcano. So the call was made to Jose, and he said that they would be as quick as possible. Stanley stood on the rim of the crater watching the teams disperse. Igor had run off on his own with his cigarette in his mouth, taking samples of fumarole, and of course he wore no mask. 30 minutes later, around 10:15, Igor was finished and headed for the inner crater. Nestor couldn't resist joining the crazy Russian, so he also ran into the crater with him. Jose remained on the rim of the crater with Stanley. The second team was Jeff Brown, Carlos Trujillo, and Fernando Cuenca. They left the main group and were moving clockwise around the crater, taking measurements. Jeff Brown, age 47, was a renowned global authority on volcanoes and was one of Britain's most distinguished scientists. He was a pioneer in the use of gravity measurements to help increase the accuracy of predictions about when and where a volcano is likely to erupt. He was charismatic, gregarious, and he met Stanley a decade earlier. They'd talked for years about collaborating on the volcano, and it was finally happening. Jeff was excited to apply his gravity techniques here. He did have second thoughts about the field trip when he was working in Costa Rica before the conference, but decided to go anyways. 3 weeks before the conference, he acknowledged the dangers of working on a volcano and told his family that he would rather die in a volcano than die in a car accident.
I mean,
Carlos was a native of Pasto
Sure.
and 36 years old. He was a professor of civil engineering and he jumped at the opportunity to work with Jeff. Fernando was only 27 years old and the youngest scientist on the trip. He was also the least experienced. Stanley had just met him at the conference, but learned that he was a sweet man who was in love with his new Russian bride. He was a promising geophysicist who was born in Colombia. The third team, led by Mike Conway, they had special thermometers to study temperatures inside the fumaroles. On his team was Andrew McFarlane, and both of them worked as geologists out of Florida International University in Miami. Andrew recalls tasting gas as they walked around the amphitheater, so he put his gas mask on.
it's probably
The
good.
fourth team was led by Andy Adams, and they were surveying locations for future research on magma fluids. Stanley watched him as Eager smiled, delighted with the excellent samples he was collecting. Pure hot gas from the magma column. The choking fumes down
Magma.
there, which were even worse, didn't seem to affect him. Mike and Andrew, initially planning to enter the crater, hesitated and then ultimately decided against it. And that hesitation saved their lives. It was now around 12:30 p.m. The scientists scattered across the volcano and were unaware of the catastrophe brewing beneath their feet. Andy noticed the TV crew left and he was ready to go as well. He was out of shape and uncomfortably hot in the coverall, so he wanted to get out of there.
Yeah. I know how that
Sweat
is.
trickled down his back as he stood on the lip of the crater with Andrew, Mike, Lewis, Jose, and Stanley. Jeff, Fernando, and Carlos were circling around the crater taking readings. The air grew thicker with the acrid smell of gases. Stanley approached Jeff, who reported some strange readings on his machine, rapid fluctuations in gravity. Jeff shrugged it off, though, blaming it on possible damage to his device during travel.
No,
He
that's
didn't
how
seem
it
too
always is.
concerned, but there was an uneasy
Oh,
feeling
it's
in the air.
malfunctioning.
Was this a sign? Jeff walked off to take more readings, and it was now 1:30 p.m.
No, you fucked up.
Stanley was now ready to get out of the volcano. They'd
Yeah.
been in there for more
It's
than
like,
3 hours, and he
let's
knew
go.
it had been too long. He yelled at Igor to hurry up and get going. Igor, who was nonchalant and not hurrying, replied in the affirmative and told him that his samples were great. All the survivors remember this moment. Igor smiling, squatting next to a fumarole with a cigarette dangling out of his mouth. He chatted with Nestor as they started up packing and began to walk out of the crater. Nearby, the 3 local hikers who had climbed down were talking with Jose. The atmosphere was deceptively calm. Then, Stanley recalls rocks tumbling off the wall. Simultaneously,
That's
Lewis
not
saw
good.
a column of yellow ash rise up about 10 feet in the air. It looked distinctly different from the fumarole steam they'd been seeing, and he asked Stanley about it, and he told him that it was normal. Andrew recounted hearing 3 moderate-sized rock slides within the span of a minute.
Yep.
And
Get the
that was
fuck out
enough.
of there.
The sound
out.
echoed through the volcano, but visibility was poor, and he couldn't see where it was happening. Jose reminded them that there was no seismic activity at the observatory, so he told them not to worry. They all started to leave. The 3 locals first, then Jose, Stanley, Lewis, and then Mike. They moved with a sense of urgency, yet trying to maintain composure amidst the growing signs of unrest. And at 1:42 p.m., one of the scientists made it out of the volcano where the reporters were waiting. A journalist stuck a camera in his face, asking him, "When do you think it will erupt?" And the scientist responded that it could be in a year from now, or a month, or even next week. They really didn't know.
Or
and then
right now.
suddenly, the video went blank. Then
Oh,
in the
shit.
air, there was this enormous explosion followed by blood-curdling screams. Ash, steam, and glowing rocks began to spew out of the volcano. The scientists inside heard a sound like a horrifying clap of thunder. From inside the volcano, the eruption was a terrifying nightmare.
Well,
Andrew
yeah, no
recalled,
shit.
at first it wasn't clear what was happening, but then I looked back, up on top, and there was a dark cloud. Someone, I think it was Stan, said, "It's the volcano!" and we started running. Running was nearly impossible. The surface was a treacherous mix of soft ash and large boulders, so they just couldn't get their footing. Blocks of hot rocks rained down and sharp fragments shattered on impact, slicing through the air and careening towards people. Andrew saw the hikers trying to flee, but within seconds, all 3 were struck with rocks. Their skulls were hammered by the rocks and their bodies collapsed to the ground, clothing igniting from the intense heat.
Goddamn.
He
It's
said
like
of a lot of frantic
spontaneous
memories
combustion.
of running and falling and getting up and then falling again. The blocks were a meter across and I saw someone hit by one. Michael described the chaos. There was suddenly a blast, just an explosion, and we all started running down the slope. I took one hit in the head, but it was a small rock. Lots of bleeding, but that was it. We then got behind some rocks and pulled our packs over our heads and tried to outwait the worst of the eruption. We saw some dead Colombian scientists on the way down. Stanley ran as fast as he could, trying to put as much distance between him and the crater as possible. Then a rock struck him. It felt as if someone had taken a baseball bat to his head. The rock was no bigger than an orange, but it hit with such force that it knocked him sideways. Rocks flew past him and shattered as they hit the ground, sending fragments of red-hot, hissing shrapnel into his flesh. He looked over to see Jose bloody and contorted. The 3 hikers were laid out as well, and all 4 were dead.
Damn.
Stanley tried to keep running, but rocks just kept pelting him. And then one nearly severed his right foot, and another hit his leg, exposing and breaking his bone. His pants and jacket caught on fire, and he rolled around to extinguish the flames.
Stop,
The
drop,
ground
and
beneath
roll,
him
baby.
shook violently and continuously, the most powerful eruption Galeras had seen in 5 years. Stanley dodged falling rocks as they flew towards him as he rolled out of the way.
Where am I
Andy
going?
hid behind a boulder, feeling the crack of rocks on his hard hat and burning on his neck. Rocks spewed onto the summit, forcing reporters and others who were out there to dodge them and run away. Andrew fully expected to die at this moment. There were so many rocks falling that he couldn't see them all and had no idea how to get out of the way. And in that moment, his mind flashed back to the talk by Dr. Peter Baxter. Andrew remembers him saying that when people are caught in a volcanic explosion, 50% usually survive. And that gave him a tiny sliver of hope. Everyone was worried about a pyroclastic flow, which would just incinerate them all if it happened. And after 5 harrowing minutes, the rock shower was over. Ash continued to fall, and then it started to rain. Stanley lay there fighting the urge to succumb to despair. I'm going to make it out alive, he told himself, clinging to the thought like a lifeline. His thoughts were interrupted by another explosion, followed by another shower of large stones. The air was filled with the deafening roar of the volcano, and he felt utterly hopeless, just at the mercy of the volcano. The tension was unbearable, each second stretching into an eternity as they waited for a new cataclysmic eruption. Within 15 minutes, the eruption subsided. Survivors later credited their survival to the quick actions of rescuers who braved the still smoking crater. Marta and Patty reached the volcano first, their hearts pounding with fear and determination. They knew their colleagues were down there, injured. They entered the volcano a full hour before any other rescuers arrived, the column of ash still spewing ominously. The sulfur burned their lungs as they descended, each step filled with dread. Despite their terror, they helped numerous people out of the volcano that day.
That's crazy.
Rescuers then arrived, and they took hours getting Stanley out. When he was finally out, he was airlifted to a hospital. Without that helicopter, he may not have survived. And he spent years in recovery. Andrew recalls a haunting memory. Igor relaxing at the bottom of the inner crater just minutes before the eruption. He said, I'm sure he was killed before he even knew what happened.
Damn.
The scientists that died that day were Jeff Brown, Jose Zapata, Igor Minyalov, Fernando Cuenca, Carlos Trujillo, and Nestor Garcia.
What a way to go, though, I guess.
Some people later said that it came down to fate. If it happened an hour earlier, they all would have been killed. Scientists later said that after the 1992 eruption, the cracks allowing gases to escape began to seal. They detected little gas from the volcano not because there was none, but because it couldn't escape. By January 1993, it was like a pressure cooker with a clogged safety valve. In retrospect, Galeras had been sending subtle signals that it was about to blow. There had been long period earthquakes weeks before the eruption, which suddenly stopped days before. This indicated that the volcano was so plugged, fluid simply stopped rising. The final earthquake took place 4 hours before the eruption, just as the scientists were hiking into the amphitheater.
That's wild that it's like
That was
specifically
the
at that
tornado
point.
that showed on the seismograph
Yeah.
at 9:47 a.m. After the eruption, there were 3 more eruptions in March, April, and June of the same year. Stanley pointed out in his book Surviving Galeras that scientists at the Alaskan Volcanic Observatory in Fairbanks reviewed the seismic data from Galeras and found that no earthquakes of even a tiny magnitude appeared before the explosion. But Stanley was also desperately trying to prove that no one could have forecasted this eruption because it would mean that he was partly responsible for the deaths. He later said many colleagues assured him that he had done nothing wrong, that there was no way to foresee the eruption, but many disagreed, calling it reckless. And he accused Stanley of not only ignoring seismic warnings, but keeping them from his team. He said, "I had no prior knowledge of any seismic precursors before entering the volcano." And he was also angry about the lack of safety clothing and gear. Stan's response later was that each of us weighed the risks and decided that good boots and warm clothing were sufficient.
Sure.
He also said that he wasn't about to enforce dress codes, and at that time, few scientists wore that kind of safety gear on active volcanoes. Victoria Bruce, author of No Apparent Danger, noted that Stanley wasn't aware of the significance of the tornadoes because he specialized in gases. Stanley reflected on the eruption and said, "It taught us a lot about how the volcano behaves, but it's tragic that people died in the process. The only comfort is that volcanology progress often comes on the heels of disaster." In the end, the legacy of Galeras was twofold: a tragic loss and a significant leap in scientific knowledge. It serves as a somber reminder of nature's unpredictable fury and the fine line between scientific exploration and mortal peril.
That's pretty good. She's very YouTube, like YouTube voice, if that makes sense. Like people say these sentences with particular inflections, like every single sentence. I don't know, it's distracting to me. Let's see. Launches early, what? The overthrow of Conan O'Brien exposed Hollywood's corruption. Ooh, that might be fun. Maybe watch that later, after dinner. Let's see. Wait, what? Defunctland, the history of the worst convention of all time, Mega 64 Expo? What is this? Is this like a spoof or something?
In 1975, an ambitious new convention experience was created in San Diego called Mega 64 Expo, known by most as simply 64X. The event celebrated the comedy video.
This is a. I don't want to watch that right now. Let's see. Anything? Not really. Okay. All right, I'm gonna get off. I'll get back on after we eat today. So it's like 3. I'll probably